Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Good morning. My name is Dean Guo. I'm from Microsoft External Research. I will be the moderator for this session. Welcome to BioTools. We got 4 presenters. We're scheduled to finish by 12:15, so each presenter has 30 minutes. And I will try to monitor the time. So our first presenter is Professor Marty Humphrey. His presentation is Publication and Consumption of caBIG Data Services using .NET.
Thank you very much for coming. I've had my coffee this morning. I don't think it's quite kicked in, but I'm going to try to write some code from scratch in the middle of this, and so you can either root me on or watch me crash and burn. So the nature of the talk is there's this large-scale grid and eScience system supported by National Institutes of Health in the U.S. Through National Cancer Institutes called caBIG. It's a very large system. Essentially, all the infrastructure is built on Java, and we wanted to investigate in some prototyping efforts whether or not we could do anything with .NET. And the nature of it was not we were going to just simply replicate anything that they were creating on the Java tooling side, but rather we were going to see what unique capabilities from the Windows ecosystem, so to speak, that we could try to leverage and integrate with the rest of the system. So the nature of the talk is I'm going to give a brief introduction to caBIG, just a very brief outlining of what's going on, and then we're going to jump right into what we are attempting to do with various .NET technologies. So caBIG, well, the vision is probably the best way to describe it, a virtual network of interconnected data, individuals, and organizations whose goal is to redefine how research is conducted, care is provided, and participants interact in the biomedical research enterprise. The core principles of caBIG are open access, open development, open source, and federation. The open source and open development, I suppose, is where this effort particularly fits in. This is the state of caBIG right now. These are various centers and sub-centers, so to speak, that are interconnected via the caBIG infrastructure. And so there's a pretty successful deployment going on right now. So there's caBIG, which is the larger, broader effort, and then there's caGrid. Grid is arguably the attempt to bring the grid technologies into play with caBIG. So caGrid, what they're trying to do is that's really approaching the federation goals and the common metadata goals of the larger caBIG infrastructure. So caGrid consists of a number of services shown here. The ones that I'm going to focus on in this talk are up in the upper left-hand corner, the data services. And so I want to provide you a little more background of what these particular data services are attempting to do. One of the defining characteristics of caBIG, from my perspective, I've been in enough grid systems for a while that I think the defining characteristic of caBIG and caGrid is this notion of semantic interoperability. There's a large emphasis on being able to describe common clinical data, for example, using common vocabularies, and so there's a big emphasis on the semantic aspects. And as you can imagine, that's a very sizable goal, trying to achieve semantic interoperability. And they've done actually a pretty good job of it so far. The basis of the semantic interoperability is arguably a grounding in fairly complex models that don't have to be, but are typically UML models of how everything is connected together. And so the system is expected to be able to retrieve these models dynamically and to parse them and pull from common libraries of dictionaries and taxonomies. And so the data model, the semantic interoperability for the data models of all the cancer data that the different centers want to put out there on the caGrid, one of the things that they're trying to emphasize is these CDEs, the bottom, the common data elements. Again, that's a way to describe common ideas to attempt to achieve semantic interoperability. So they have a number of metadata services that are unfortunately, I cannot go into detail. I don't have time. But these, again, are largely created both for discovery purposes that you would expect in a grid environment, but also the CADSR, EVS, and GME in particular are services that play a role in the attempted semantic interoperability. So, given that very fast introduction, why, again, are we trying to do something with .NET? In the context of caBIG and caGrid, again, everything has been Java-oriented, and so we want essentially those two main goals. One is we want to leverage the huge number of .NET developers already existing out there, and the second is we want to not necessarily convert, but rather expose people to some of the interesting capabilities that exist right now and are coming down the pipe. And so we want to do this investigation in particular into what we can do today. And some of the technologies that we'd be looking at in particular are Visual Studio, SQL Server, Windows Workflow, and Link. And we also want to look at what might be coming down the pipe. The two in particular that I want to mention briefly are cloud computing, which I'll talk about again at the end of the talk. Then Oslo. Oslo is this really interesting modeling capability that would provide a nice addition, I think, to some of the modeling requirements that caBIG are doing right now. So again, we're very interested in what we can do now and what we can do moving down into the future. So given all those services, this is kind of what we're faced with. How do you create a caGrid service right now? And I don't know about you, but I look at that and I get scared. This thing is huge. Again, this is the way they do things now. This is the way they create a service now. So they have to start all the way up here in the left-hand corner and come through this whole branching structure to eventually get to this right side, which would take their data that has been expressed in a common vocabulary, put into common services. And over here is really the grid side, so to speak. So again, this is the UML and the common vocabulary, and then this is the grid tooling. Take the data that they want to make available and then do various grid things to get it out there. So what this talk is really going to focus on is this right side. What can we do? What capabilities via .NET ecosystem we can do and introduce on the right side. And so if we really want to focus it a little more, this is really the way the grid clients and the grid services connect together right now, using some of those services that I introduced a moment ago. The clients talk to the services. They talk to common vocabulary systems dynamically to make sure that the clients can understand the data coming back. And so again, we're looking at trying to do something that looks generally like this. To further refine it, we want to look at a particular user scenario. A researcher is studying the human BRCA gene and wants to find information available in public resources on protein encoded by this gene. What that means in terms of caBIG are these four sequence operations. First is discovery. Second is to use the common data elements, the common vocabulary, to see different services that might actually provide this information. The third is to interact on a per client, per service basis to talk to the service to attempt to get information back related to the BRCA gene. And the fourth one is to federate and combine these. We're going to do the third, which is to build a client that speaks this caBIG query language, CQL. It talks to the service, gets the information back, and displays that information to the screen. So we're going to attempt to do this now. So I have a virtual environment, a virtual PC environment, and we're going to build the client from scratch. I figure people don't see enough code in these things, and so what the heck. So we're going to build a new project, a console application. We'll call it eScience 4. What we'd like to do, for those of you familiar with Visual Studio, what we'd like to do over here is to, we'd like to add the service reference to the particular service that we want to aim at. I'll show you what the tooling comes back with. Right, so if everything worked perfectly, we would take this tooling built in Visual Studio, just aim it at the Java service that's going to serve up the BRCA information. We would like to do that, and all the tooling would be wonderful. Now, unfortunately, here's where the ugly interop comes in. And in fact, the tooling here cannot entirely process the WSDL from the Java service, and so we're going to do some of this by hand. But it's not going to take long, I promise. eScience 4. So we need to create a new folder that's going to hold our proxy code. We're going to eScience 4 proxy temp code. We're going to invoke, in effect, what the UI, Visual Studio, does. We're going to invoke that on the command prompt. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to go out to the service and we're going to acquire all the metadata. So that's the XSD and the WSDL, essentially. We're going to bring that back into this folder. And there's actually, I think, 27 files. The problem child, is this bindings file. And I need to fix this by hand, not too difficult. Unfortunately, I can't easily type and talk. I need to change this in 6 places. And hopefully my big sausage fingers will help me do this quickly. For those of you who unfortunately have this background, you'll notice that this is actually WSRF-isms that I need to fix. If that doesn't mean anything to you, consider yourself lucky. essentially what's going on is the Java tooling is not scoping something down, so to speak, and we have to do it by hand. I can do this via XSLT, but I wanted to do it by hand just to show you that there is no magic here, and it's not that difficult. This is the last one. And hopefully I did it correctly. So again, what happened here was that the WSDL the WSDL that the service is publishing. Excuse me, I must have done a typo. Query response properties. Get multiple request. Get multiple response properties. Request. Request response. Okay. Now, after the so the WSDL has problems in it, and so one of the files that came back, we had to modify by hand. Once we modified by hand, we invoked the .NET tooling to generate the proxies. After we've generated the proxies, I want to add those to the Visual Studio solution. Yeah, let's come back up here. And I'm actually going to add a different version that I know works. That's the proxy. Now I have to add app.config, which in effect tells the client where the service is. I have to rename this to be app.config. Now I have to add two libraries. One is the WCF library, the service model, and the other one is the serialization. And finally, I add my client code. I'll show you what that is. So the client code that I cut and paste because I don't have time is essentially instantiating a proxy to the service. It's constructing the CQL query, and you can tell that from reading it that we're looking for gene symbols like BRCA. And if everything goes accordingly, I hit F5, my client runs, and it talks to the service and gets back the 4 genes like BRCA. Now, so yes, I did in fact kind of do that from scratch. The only thing I cut and paste was this. And so what you should get out of this is that, yeah, you can actually build a .NET client to a real live Java service, have the .NET client do something interesting, and you could do it in about 5 minutes. And so in general, things work. That interop with the WSDL is problematic. We've talked to the caBIG people, and they're in the process of changing the WSDL published, and so hopefully this manual step you will not have to do any longer. But at any rate, that client works, and it really was built from scratch. This is a recap of what we just did, which was we got the proxies, we modified 6 places in the WSDL, we generated the proxies, and then we added to Visual Studio and our service code, and we ran it. So that's good. Now, so on the data service side, which is arguably more interesting, we wanted to see, given our success on the client side, if we could take interesting cancer data and publish it, conform it to caBIG requirements using .NET technology. And the particular data we're looking at is what they call caBIO, which is a collection of different specific data for cancer researchers. We took it Excuse me. It was held in Oracle, so here's our exact process of how we attempted to do this. We exported it from Oracle. SQL Server 2005 is a nice way of importing it, and so we put it into SQL Server 2005. Then we use this interesting .NET technology called ADO.NET Data Services. This provided a REST interface to the SQL tables. I'll show you a little bit more about that in a moment. This step is wonderful. It works very well, very quickly, and it does exactly what you need to do. We then created the external-facing service using WCF. This is the service that would conform to the canonical caBIG data service WSDL. So again, this is the thing that all the clients, all the existing clients out there, as long as this conformed to the WSDL of the caBIG data service, then we are good to go. So in the body, what we had to do was, as you can imagine, we had to figure out how to parse CQL, caBIG query language, and convert that into queries against the REST data service. We had to do a little bit of WSRF isms. We had to figure out the XSD and the canonical vocabulary for caBIO, and then we had to publish it to the caGrid index service. And of course, then we'd have our clients. I could do this demo, but I'm not going to be that crazy because this takes a lot longer, as you can imagine. I do want to show you one part of this step, which is I want to show you the REST interface to the data. So again, I'm talking about this step here in the middle where we have our data in SQL Server and we're essentially trying to make it available via a browser and any sort of REST-speaking technology. The way you can do that takes about 5 minutes. Excuse me. And this is the type of interface that you see, and you can access it via the browser. So this is the top level of that data service. This is live. It's speaking to our SQL Server back at University of Virginia. You can explore it via manipulating the URI. And so if I spell it correctly, which I did not do, must be chromosome. So you can interactively explore the database via the browser if you want to go to it. This is very convenient. The REST interface has a very expressive syntax. And so if you're interested in you have data in SQL Server and you want to make it available via the web, I highly endorse this. This is a very good thing. And we'll return to this in a moment. So we were successful surprisingly to ourselves of being able to do this, and this actually worked. We don't have a full-blown data service that serves up this data, and this is some lessons learned that I would have described if we had the demo. Getting things into SQL Server was, as I wrote up there, easy once we figured out how to do it. Conforming to the WSDL, we had to change to 6 lines, so that's not that difficult. Getting data out of the SQL Server, that's what I was just talking about. The REST ADO.NET Data Services is a terrific technology, and it works very nicely. CQL processing, that's one of our stumbling blocks. Doing that whole language is fairly complicated. Implementing the WSRF services were not that difficult. And then there's some other issues that we had in here. But basically, we are able to create the data service that conforms. And to show you that actually works, this is the National Cancer Institute portal to the existing caGrid. They run 2. There's sort of a production side and then a test side. This is the test side. And so this is a portal that you can look at all the data services that are currently live right now. And this is our service that we created, the .NET caBIO service. And so you can query it. And we're going to count the number of chromosomes. So again, this is live. We're going to submit the query. This is their pre-existing portal interface to the training side of the grid. And what I did was I just ran it against our .NET-based caBIO service live at the University of Virginia right now. The query that I constructed here was actually a CQL query to count the number of chromosomes in our service. You can see here that it executed and it completed. And if you look at the results, it shows there are 84 there. So this is live. This is working. So we're pretty happy so far. So again, at this point, we got everything hooked together. We're pretty happy. We have more in the guts of the service to do. The CQL. This is largely specific to caBIG processing, and we have some more stuff to do in there. But last week, last week in particular, we were really interested in how easily we could attempt to use the cloud. So as you can imagine, what that means is that we have SQL Server storing the data right now locally. These are the same machine. WCF and SQL Server are either on the same machine or machines right next to each other. And so we were interested in taking the data from SQL Server, moving it into Azure, and then trying to get the data that way. So what we were looking at in particular was, can we do it? Are the APIs sufficient? How difficult was this? And again, we only started about a week ago trying to do this. And the end result of that is that I showed you the REST interface to the local data. So what this is a browser running on this laptop talking to SQL Server at the University of Virginia. Come to find out, this is not the data that's actually being served up by this thing. We were actually successful in moving it to the cloud. And so whereas in this previous architecture, we got at that data via REST. And so if we were able to make it into the cloud, conceptually all that means is that we'd have to change this REST URI to aim somewhere else. So conceptually, it's not that difficult. The devil's in the details, of course. But that query that we just did here was actually talking to the cloud. In this, you can see a different URL. This is our URL into the Azure cloud. And so this is the URL that we are actually speaking to. In other words, we could do it locally against SQL Server, but we were successful in moving it to the cloud. And so the APIs are sufficient. We could do things pretty quickly, and that's very cool. We were very surprised to see how easily we could do it. Your next question might be, okay, interesting, what about performance? Here's some performance. As far as I know, these are the first cloud numbers, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't get out enough. So here's our 4 canonical queries on the left. How many chromosomes? That's the one we just did. We also have another one, how many genes, and there's actually 202,000. If we restrict it to how many genes, maxing out at 500, and then our last one was find me the genes like BRCA, that we could actually do that. I didn't show you here. Here's the times. Chromosomes, 1 second each. How many genes? Well, so that gets a little more complicated. The local, for some reason, you have to talk to the Microsoft people, but for some reason, the thing that we wanted to do is actually not implemented yet. In other words, we can't actually do a simple count. And so we had to actually do some fairly annoying deserialization. In other words, we actually had to get all 202,000 of them, deserialize them in order to count them up. That's why it's 68 seconds locally. It's about 3 times longer in Azure. The problem with Azure at the moment is that I don't know why they do this, but it could be because it's just for free now, and maybe that's it. But they'll only serve you up a maximum of 500. And so we actually had to get at all 202,000. If you do the math, we actually had to do 405 interactions to get all of them back. 405 interactions from University of Virginia to wherever essentially takes 198. So that's actually decent performance in my opinion. That's only 3 times worse. So that's not that bad. And again, given all the serialization, we can cut that down pretty quickly. How many genes? Because of that 500, we also wanted to see, well, okay, if we got around the limitation of the 500, then how long would it take? There's a couple different ways to do it locally, and the interaction with the cloud is actually pretty comparable, and so we were happy with those numbers. Find me the genes like BRCA, which is ultimately the real sort of scientific query that would happen. That 202,000, that probably would not happen. A scientist, a cancer researcher would probably not ask that. The one they would ask is find me the genes like BRCA, and we were getting 2 in 3 seconds, and so these were pretty good numbers. So overall, with our experience in the cloud, we found that it was pretty nice in terms of the API to get things in, and the performance was okay. The performance was not bad at all. So to wrap up, .NET clients are pretty good. We have that WSDL issue. The caBIG Java people are looking to fix that for us. If they fix that, then we should be able to build clients pretty easily. I'll point out that we actually have a nice Silverlight running client as well, but I don't have time to show that. So client side is okay. The server side is pretty good as well. We have some more stuff that we need to do. Our preliminary interactions with the cloud are pretty encouraging, I think. And so we're moving forward with the NCI people, National Cancer Institute people. We need to do some more prototyping with regard to security in particular. We think we have a handle on how to do that, but that's the stumbling block right now. We have to maintain we have to achieve interoperability with the existing caBIG infrastructure with regard to security. Once we do that, we're hoping to do sort of full-scale development and really get this technology into the hands of the caBIG people. And we think it could work out really well, both for existing technologies right now and, like I mentioned, in particular, the cloud technology and Oslo. I think Oslo will work out really nicely here. That's it. Thank you.